An iconic Hollywood actor, Michael Madsen, has died at age 67. He was found unresponsive at his home in Malibu, California this afternoon.
The news reports that filled the screens tonight spoke in calm, restrained tones, announcing the passing of a familiar face from a vanished era. They recited dates, film titles, and polite summaries, as if a life could be reduced to a few carefully chosen sentences. But behind those reports, beneath the composed anchors and archival photographs, lay a story far darker and far more complicated. A story of beauty sharpened by loneliness, of sudden fame that arrived like a storm, and of a man who spent his life moving between light and shadow, never fully belonging to either. The mystery begins on April 17, 2011, when Michael Sarrazin died quietly in Montreal after a long battle with cancer. There were no scandals erupting in the streets, no final public confessions, no dramatic courtroom scenes. Just a quiet ending to a life that had once burned brilliantly in the unforgiving glare of Hollywood. Yet for those who remembered him, for those who studied the strange arc of his career, his death reopened old questions. How does someone rise so quickly, shine so intensely, and then slowly drift into obscurity without ever truly falling? And what does it cost a man to be admired, desired, and misunderstood all at once? Long before the camera lights found him, before critics debated his talent and audiences projected their fantasies onto his face, Michael Sarrazin entered the world on April 22, 1940, in Quebec City, Canada. He was born into a country still marked by wartime tension and cultural restraint, a place where ambition rarely announced itself loudly. His father was a businessman, disciplined and practical, while his mother carried a quieter emotional depth that would leave a lasting imprint on her son. From the beginning, Michael grew up between opposing forces, stability on one side, sensitivity on the other. As a child, he was introspective, observant, and unusually aware of emotional undercurrents around him. Those close to him later recalled a boy who listened more than he spoke, who absorbed moods and tensions as if they were part of the air he breathed. In school, he was not disruptive, but he was distant, already practicing the quiet internal life that would later define his screen presence. He was handsome even then, though the attention it drew often made him uncomfortable. Beauty came early to Michael Sarrazin, but confidence did not. His family life offered structure, but not always emotional clarity. Like many children of his era, feelings were rarely discussed openly, and vulnerability was often mistaken for weakness. This unspoken pressure shaped him deeply. He learned to express emotion through silence, through posture, through eyes that seemed to carry stories he never verbalized. Without realizing it, he was already training himself for a life in front of the camera. During adolescence, his restlessness grew stronger. By his teenage years in the mid-1950s, Michael felt increasingly confined by expectations placed upon him. Academic life held little interest, and traditional career paths felt suffocating. According to those who knew him at the time, he struggled with identity. Unsure whether he belonged to the disciplined world his father valued, or to the emotional, expressive realm that quietly pulled at him. His escape came through performance, not immediately through acting, but through the idea of transformation. He became fascinated with the notion that a person could step outside themselves, even briefly, and exist as someone else. That fascination hardened into ambition when he moved to Toronto as a young man, searching for opportunity in a city that offered little certainty and even less mercy. The early 1960s were not kind to dreamers. Michael worked odd jobs to survive, enduring rejection after rejection from casting directors who found him intriguing but undefined. Some believed he was too quiet, too internal, too difficult to categorize. Others saw potential but hesitated, unsure whether audiences would understand him. Each rejection carved deeper doubts into his psyche, reinforcing the fear that perhaps he was meant to remain invisible. Yet those struggles also refined him. He studied acting seriously, committing himself to the craft with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He learned restraint, learning that sometimes the most powerful performances come not from what is said, but from what is withheld. This internal discipline became his signature, though at the time it felt like survival rather than artistry. By the mid-1960s, Michael Sarrazin began landing small television roles, each one a test, each one a fragile step forward. He appeared in episodic dramas where his presence lingered longer than his screen time. Casting directors noticed something unsettling and compelling about him, a quiet gravity that suggested emotional depth far beyond the script. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his name began circulating. Then, in 1969, everything changed. Michael Sarrazin was cast in the harrowing film They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, released in the summer of that year. The project was brutal, emotionally punishing, and unrelentingly dark, depicting desperate souls trapped in a Depression-era dance marathon. It was not glamorous, it was not safe, and it demanded everything from its cast. When the film premiered, audiences were shaken. Critics were divided, but they could not ignore Sarrazin's performance. His portrayal carried a haunting emotional weight, stripped of sentimentality, filled with exhaustion and despair. Fame arrived suddenly, violently, without warning. For Michael, the recognition was both exhilarating and terrifying. He was no longer invisible, he was being watched. As awards season approached, the film garnered widespread acclaim, earning multiple Academy Award nominations, while Sarrazin himself did not receive a nomination. His face became inseparable from the film's bleak legacy. Hollywood had taken notice. Doors opened, offers followed, and with them came a pressure he had never prepared for. The industry wanted to define him, to mold him into a symbol, a leading man, a romantic ideal. But Michael Sarrazin was not built for easy narratives. The same introspection that made him compelling on screen made him elusive off it. He was praised, admired, desired, yet fundamentally misunderstood. And as the lights grew brighter, the shadows inside him deepened. The rise had begun, but the cost had yet to be paid. Fame did not arrive for Michael Sarrazin like a celebration. It arrived like exposure. After 1969, his face was suddenly everywhere, framed by critical praise and industry fascination, yet stripped of the privacy that had once protected him. Hollywood did not ask whether he was ready. It was simply decided that it was necessary. The early 1970s became the most intense and disorienting period of his life. Directors sought him for roles that required emotional depth rather than charm. Men fractured by circumstance, lovers burdened by silence, outsiders who never fully belonged. Each performance reinforced the image of Sarrazin as a brooding introspective presence, a man whose stillness carried more weight than dialogue ever could. The public admired him. Studios trusted him, but very few truly understood him. As his career expanded, so did the tension between his private nature and the expectations placed upon him. Hollywood demanded accessibility, charisma, and consistency. Michael Sarrazin offered none of those easily. He disliked interviews, avoided self-promotion, and resisted the machinery of celebrity culture. According to those close to him, the more famous he became, the more withdrawn he grew. Fame sharpened his isolation, rather than dissolving it. It was during this volatile period that his personal life became inseparable from his public image. In the early 1970s, Sarrazin met Jacqueline Bisset, one of the most luminous and sought-after actresses of the era. Their connection was immediate, intense, and deeply romantic. At least on the surface, she embodied glamour, confidence, and public fascination. He embodied restraint, emotional depth, and mystery. Together, they became a symbol of cinematic beauty and intellectual allure. They married in 1974, a union celebrated by the press as a perfect alignment of talent and elegance. Photographs from the time show two impossibly beautiful people standing beside one another, admired and envied in equal measure. Yet behind the images, the marriage carried immense strain. According to those who observed them closely, Sarrazin struggled with the constant scrutiny that followed their relationship. Every appearance became a performance, every disagreement risked becoming a rumor. The marriage began to fracture under the weight of competing careers and incompatible emotional rhythms. Jacqueline Bisset thrived in the spotlight. Michael Sarrazin recoiled from it. By 1977, the relationship had collapsed, ending in divorce. There was no public spectacle, no dramatic scandal, only a quiet separation that mirrored the way Sarrazin lived his life. Still, the emotional toll was severe. The dissolution reinforced his growing belief that intimacy and fame could not coexist. Professionally, the mid-1970s brought continued success, though of a different kind. In 1976, Sarrazin starred in The Gumball Rally, a high-energy action comedy that contrasted sharply with his earlier dramatic work. The film became a cult favorite, introducing him to a new audience and demonstrating his range. Yet even this success carried a hidden cost. Hollywood began shifting its expectations, uncertain whether to market him as a dramatic actor or an unconventional leading man. This ambiguity placed him in a precarious position. He was respected, but not easily packaged, talented, but resistant to conformity. As blockbuster cinema began to dominate the industry, Sarrazin found himself increasingly out of step with its demands. According to industry insiders, he turned down several roles that might have elevated his commercial profile, uncomfortable with scripts that felt hollow or emotionally dishonest. Behind the scenes, the psychological pressure intensified. Some believed that Sarrazin struggled with bouts of depression during this time, though he never spoke publicly about mental health. According to those close to him, he questioned his place in the industry, haunted by the sense that his greatest work might already be behind him. Fame, once intoxicating, had begun to feel like a narrowing corridor with no clear exit. By the late 1970s, the momentum that once carried him effortlessly forward began to slow. Roles became less frequent. Scripts felt less daring. Hollywood's attention shifted toward younger faces and louder performances. Michael Sarrazin did not fight for relevance. He simply stepped back quietly, as if retreating were an act of self-preservation rather than defeat. Yet this withdrawal was not without consequence. Distance bred forgetfulness, absence bred erasure, and as the industry moved on, Sarrazin was left to navigate the aftermath of a career that had burned brightly but briefly, leaving behind unanswered questions and unresolved tensions. The man who once stood at the center of Hollywood's darkest masterpieces now found himself standing at its edges, watching from a distance as the world he once inhabited evolved without him. And this distance would soon mark the most decisive turning point of his life. The turning point did not arrive with a single headline or scandal. It came quietly, the way exhaustion often does, unnoticed, until it has already changed everything. By the early 1980s, Michael Sarrazin was no longer chasing Hollywood, and Hollywood was no longer chasing him. The industry had shifted toward spectacle, speed, and excess, and Sarrazin's inward, restrained intensity felt increasingly out of place. The very qualities that once made him magnetic now made him invisible. According to those who worked with him during this period, Sarrazin did not rage against the decline. He did not fight the system or reinvent himself with desperation. Instead, he withdrew, choosing smaller projects, television appearances, and independent films that offered creative sincerity rather than public attention. This retreat was often misinterpreted as apathy, but in truth, it was a form of self-protection. Fame had cost him intimacy, stability, and emotional clarity, and he was no longer willing to pay that price. In 1982, he appeared in The Seduction, a psychological thriller that echoed the darker emotional landscapes he had always inhabited. Though the film did not revive his mainstream career, it revealed something essential about him. Sarrazin had never been interested in stardom for its own sake. He was drawn to emotional risk, to complexity, to stories that mirrored his own internal unease. As the offers dwindled, he accepted the narrowing path with a quiet resignation. Away from Hollywood, Sarrazin's personal life found a gentler rhythm. In the mid-1980s, he married again, this time to actress Susan Benton. The relationship lacked the public spectacle of his first marriage and reflected his growing desire for privacy. Together, they settled in Canada, distancing themselves from the relentless gaze of American celebrity culture. For Sarrazin, this move was not a retreat into obscurity, but a return to self. Yet distance did not erase regret. According to those close to him, he remained haunted by the sense of unfinished potential. He questioned whether he had withdrawn too soon, whether silence had cost him opportunities he might have reclaimed. These doubts surfaced quietly, often late at night in moments of reflection rather than confession. He was not bitter, but he was aware of what had been lost. As the years passed, his appearances became increasingly rare. By the 1990s, Michael Sarrazin was no longer a familiar name to younger audiences. His films circulated quietly among cinephiles, rediscovered by those who recognized the power of his understated performances. He became a cult figure rather than a mainstream icon, remembered intensely by a few rather than casually by many. Then came the final struggle, one he faced with the same restraint that defined his life. In the late 2000s, Sarrazin was diagnosed with cancer. The illness advanced slowly, privately, away from public attention. There were no dramatic interviews, no farewell tours, no attempt to re-enter the spotlight. He chose dignity over spectacle, silence over sentimentality. His last public appearances occurred in early 2011, marked by visible frailty but emotional composure. Those who saw him during this time described a man at peace with his choices, aware of his legacy, but uninterested in shaping it. He spoke little of his career and much of ordinary things, family, memory, and time. The man who once carried the weight of despair on screen now carried acceptance with quiet grace. On April 17, 2011, Michael Sarrazin died in Montreal at the age of 70. The news reports that followed were respectful, brief, and incomplete. They spoke of notable films, of a career that peaked early, of an actor remembered by critics rather than crowds. But they did not speak of the emotional cost of beauty, or the loneliness of fame, or the courage it takes to step away from a world that demands constant performance. Michael Sarrazin's legacy does not reside in awards or box office records. It lives in moments of silence, in eyes that spoke when words failed, in performances that linger long after the screen fades to black. He embodied a kind of masculinity rarely celebrated, vulnerable, introspective, and unresolved. His life reminds us that not every star is meant to burn endlessly. Some are meant to flicker, briefly, intensely, and then disappear into darkness, leaving behind a glow that only the most attentive viewers ever notice. And so, we return to the news reports where we began. Calm voices announcing an ending, unaware that endings are never simple. Because behind those headlines, behind the dates and summaries, remains a man shaped by shadows, defined by restraint, and remembered, not for how loudly he lived, but for how deeply he felt. In the end, Michael Sarrazin did not vanish. He became a mystery,